Hello everyone, Sean Mancini here. Today I'm showing you how to set up a distributed cacti service model using remote pollers and a central cacti server. Now, Cacti as of version 1 and above supports this feature natively, and in a lot of my videos I talk about setting up Cacti assuming that it's a single instance. But on larger deployments, you would never rely on a single instance if you're talking about hundreds of devices that you're monitoring. You also want that for redundancy purposes. And depending on your network setup, if it's in multiple locations, you might want a local poller to collect the data so that things like latency and jitter over public networks or over your transport network don't interfere with the results that you get from pinging the devices or reachability checks. So in this case, I have Cacti set up and with a 3 server setup. And so there's the main Cacti poller, Cacti poller 1, and Cacti poller 2. And these are the devices that we're monitoring. So in this case, I just drew 3 routers. So SNMP traffic would come from the remote pollers and the main poller itself going to the device that it is associated to. So for instance, Cacti poller 1 can be assigned this device. Cacti poller, the main poller can be assigned this one. And Cacti poller 2, if you haven't gotten it by now, would be assigned this device to poll. So picture this. You have devices scattered across the country, say east to west. Now, on the western side of the country, you don't want something central, say in the middle of your country, polling something all the way on the opposite side. So what you would do is drop a poller maybe closer, which will reduce the amount of latency across those links to get to that device. And this is just a matter of physics problem, right? Because the further away you are from that device, the higher your latency will go up. And that doesn't necessarily reflect what's actually going on with those devices. And so that fixes the geographical issue. And then, of course, if you're monitoring hundreds of devices, you'd want to split them up between multiple servers, and that's just for load and all that stuff. So we're going to replicate this. I have set up the 3 servers. I use Linode now to do my labs. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I am able to build up and tear down as quick as possible. It's better than having to do all the virtualization locally, and it's a few bucks. So for those of you who like to do this kind of stuff, bring things up, tear them down, check out Linode. Or there's so many other VPS providers that do this now. So anyways, no more tangents. Let's get to it. So far, all I've done is downloaded the necessary Cacti installation. Now, going back to the diagram, these are all full Cacti installations, meaning the full Cacti software package will be installed along with all the SNMP libraries and everything needed to run Cacti on each one of these servers. The difference is that there's an SQL connection that's maintained between these servers, and the SQL database is replicated between the main poller. So any changes that happen on the main poller get propagated to the 2 pollers. Because of that, you need a bidirectional SQL connection, which we'll set up. And what happens is that these 2 servers do not hold on to the graph files. In fact, the main polar will hold on to the graph files themselves, the RRA files. The only time the cacti polars, the remote polars, will hold on to graphs is when they are unable to reach the main polar. In that case, what they'll do is they'll update the RRA files locally until the main polar comes back up online. Or it could be that the main polar is online, just the SQL connection for whatever reason is broken, and you'd have to look into it. All three of these servers will need to be in sync, of course, and we'll talk about that as we get going. So what I've done, just for the interest of time, is I've done the main polar and the Cacti Polar 1 server. I've downloaded all the code, running my installation wizard script, but I haven't gone through the full setup. So all that's left is actually just go through the web wizard. And so the first thing I'll do here is install the main polar by going through the setup wizard. Now, if you'd like to know how to do this manually, or how to install Cacti, then you can go to one of my previous videos. I have a few about installing Cacti and going through this menu. I'm just going to go through it quick. So this is the part that pertains to what we're talking about today, and that is selecting the type of installation. So this will be our primary server. So be sure to select new primary server. Click next, next. And we'll go ahead and install it. Okay, so Cacti is now installed. There's a few tweaks here. Now, Cacti in a distributed model and large installations recommends using Spine as a polar. Now, Spine, unlike the cmd.php, Spine is written in C, and on top of that, communicates directly with the database through the spine.com file, unlike the cmd.php, which is interpreted and then uses Cacti to the Cacti configuration files to talk to the database. So we just have to quickly change or update the configuration file for Spine on the main polar. And that's normally located in user local spine etc. So this is a new install, so I'll be moving the spine.conf.dis to spine.conf. Now, I know that the username is Cacti, password is Cacti. Obviously, in production, you'll definitely want to bulk up on security, use best password practices and stuff like that. But for our demo, to make it easy, we're not doing that. Okay. So that sets up Spine, and we can save this. All right. So now we have to set up the database starting at the main polar. Okay. So the main polar again is central to this whole thing, right? So all the remote polars will need to talk to the main polar in order to make all of this work. So we will set up the database. Now I'm getting the SQL commands because I don't always remember them off the top of my head from my script. I'll leave them in the comment section, or sorry, the video description below. Okay. Okay, so in this section, what we'll be doing is allowing the remote host to be able to log in to the main server. So the remote poller's IP like so. So essentially what we're saying is grant all privileges for Cacti to the user Cacti. Grant all privileges on the database named Cacti to the user Cacti coming in from this IP identified by the password Cacti. Again, security is not the main goal for this demo, but in production, you would never use username Cacti, password Cacti. It's definitely a no-no. But again, to make this easy, we're just using that for now. Okay, so now this is complete. We'll move over to Remote Poller 1. Okay, now we'll have to do something similar to this database here, and that is we're going to allow the main poller IP to be able to talk to the remote poller's database as well. Okay, and the only thing that changes here is the IP address that we're coming from. So again, explain this command. We're granting all privileges on the Cacti database to the user Cacti coming from this IP address identified by password Cacti. Okay, now there is something slightly different that we have to do here. A couple things. Go over to the var www html cacti include directory. You'll see that there's a config.php file in there. We'll have to modify the config.php file to tell it that we're going to be connecting to a remote database. So up here, if you've seen my previous videos, this is how you configure the local database, and this is where we can be configuring the remote database. So uncomment the following lines. So the username is Cacti, password Cacti. We'll change the local host to the remote database IP address and save that. We'll also go to user local spine etc. And again, this being all new config, we'll have to move the spine.conf.dis to spine.conf. And also, we'll have to set up the local user, so it's Cacti, the remote IP, and that also uses Cacti. Notice how this spine will even talk to the remote database as well directly. So its results go right to the database, which is much quicker. We'll save that, and now we will go over to the web installation wizard for the remote poller IP. Okay, now you'll notice something different here, and that is that the installation will automatically jump to remote polar configuration. That's because we have the remote database information set, so the installer is smart enough to know that. I did forget one thing. This will be a temporary thing, so be sure that once you're done with the installation to go back, and that is to enable full write permissions for the config.php, and this is only for the installation. Okay, you can actually just have it by enabling write for the Apache user, or 777 just briefly. So now click test connection, which will test to be sure that it has connectivity to the remote server, and click next. And now next. Give me a second here. Okay, now just finish off the installation. Confirm installation, and there we go. So now the remote server is set up, and you know that you're in the remote server when you get this big fat message saying that you're in the remote data collector. Okay, now let's go back to the main polar. Under data collection, data collectors, you'll see that a new polar has shown up. So click on the new polar. The first thing you'll have to do is put either the DNS hostname or the IP address of this polar. And then we can name it remote polar 1, put a note, something like this polar is in server rack 101. So you'll see that the host name is set to local. And so we'll have to change that obviously to the real host name and hit test configuration, test connection. So as you can see, the connection from the main polar to the remote polar is successful, connecting to a database, which is really important that you make sure that that happens. Hit save, and now over to data collection and then data collectors. You'll see that the two main polars are there. Now select the checkbox to select both and do a full sync. Now it went from heartbeat to idle. So one other thing is you should also name the main polar. For the host name, put the IP address. This gets propagated to the database, which is used also by the remote data collector to know where it is. Now, obviously, in your production environment, use DNS, which is way better than using IP, because if you ever have to change an IP and everything's pointed to that IP, it is a pain in the butt. But if you have DNS, just update the record and away you go. So, now, we have, well, just a local device here, but let's add a couple of IPs that we can ping. So let's say Google DNS, which is 8.8.8.8. Now, polar association. You see that I have two polars now, the main polar or the remote polar. Let's say this one I want to stick here on the local polar. Not using we're not using SNMP for this. Create. And then let's create some graphs for this. Oh darn, I know what I did here. I made the template cacti stats. Okay. Let us then change this cacti stats to none, because it's going to use that template with all the data sources, which we don't want. Or I might just delete. Yeah, so I'm just sorry. I'm just going to delete this device. Make it easier. Okay. Google DNS. Main polar. I won't use a template this time. Hit create. Now let's create some graphs. So for this, we'll be using, because it's ping, the Unix ping latency. Create. So that creates a graph. And we'll place this on the default tree. Okay, and next we'll add another device, and this time we'll name it, level 3 DNS, which is 4.2.2.2. It helps when you don't hit enter. Okay, so not in use, but we'll switch this to remote polar 1 and hit save. And we'll add the ping latency graph. And we will place this on the tree as well. Okay, so while we're waiting for the polar, this will now, and I can't believe I did it again. I apologize. I selected a template for even this one as the cacti stats, which will create graphs for the local machine. Not to worry, I also did the ping latency. But yes, so now that the polar is running, you'll see that that we're starting to get graphs. So this is the primary, which is the main polar, and the secondary one now working. If you were to do a TCP dump on this box, you'll see ICMP packets being sent for 8.8.8.8 and 4.2.2.2 sitting on the main polar. Now, if you want to see what devices are on what polar, you can do data. So remote polar 1, 4.2.2.2 is the remote polar. So I actually apologize. I reversed them. So 4.2.2.2 is being pulled or pinged from the remote server, and 8.8.8.8 is from the main polar. Now, say you wanted to change that. So you want to change that. It could be, for load balancing purposes or troubleshooting purposes. Not a big issue. All you gotta do is come up here for polar association, select remote polar 1, and hit save. Now, I do want to illustrate one thing here. and this is that physics problem I was talking about in the beginning. Look at remote polar 1 to 8.8.8.8. Less than 1 millisecond. Now, when I go to the main polar and hit save, I'm getting 1.5 milliseconds. Now, that's great. I apologize. That's great. But let's say in reality, in a production environment, this box, main polar was 10 milliseconds, and the remote polar was 2 milliseconds because of distance. It would really be advisable to move that device closer to on the polar closer to get better numbers as to what's going on. So that's that physics thing in real life here. We see it. Now, there are a couple things that come with having a distributed model. And that is, under the performance section, you'll notice that boost is enabled. And on-demand RRDs, meaning that when you click on a graph is when the image updates. So you can have this off on a single deployment, but on a distributed deployment, we don't update the RRDs, all the time. And you can select that behavior. So, for instance, how often do you want the RRDs updated? The lowest is 30 minutes. So every 30 minutes, all of the graphs will be updated regardless if they've been clicked on or not. That doesn't mean that when a user clicks on a graph, you're missing 30 minutes of data. No. That would trigger Cacti to update that graph with in terms of the image, but the data is still there. Okay, and so now what we'll do is add another polar, the third polar, to this system, so you can see. And that I haven't touched that server yet, so I'll show you my script as well, which makes getting started pretty simple. So the first thing I'll do is install git and unzip, which are needed for my script. Now, my script is located on my GitHub page. I'll include the link in the description. So next thing I'll do is clone the script. And now I'll run the Cacti install wizard. And because I'm using 1.2.4 for all the other deployments, I'll use 1.2.4 for this one. And of course, we have to use Spine. So I will tell the script to download Spine. Now, a couple of other side notes about using multiple polars. Not all of the Cacti plugins are compatible with this multipolar setup. The ones that are, which really are the most important ones, is Thresholds, Monitor, Intro Page, which is the plugin for a dashboard. Those are the ones that I know of for sure work with distributed models. So you will just use those, and my script will automatically download them if you select it to, or just double check on the Cacti plugins page on which ones are good for setups with multiple polars. So I'll just pause the video for a moment, and once it's done, I'll get right back to you. Okay, so the script is done. So first thing I'll do is just quickly change the host name here. Just Cacti Polar 2. That doesn't change, by the way. That doesn't change the host name permanently. You'd have to do that in the hostname file, but after we're done with this video, these servers are going to be deleted anyway, so no need for me anyways. Now as we did in the in the first remote polar, we'll have to modify the config.php file for Cacti. Okay, so I know that the remote is Cacti, and the database is Cacti, so just got to get that IP address again. Okay. Next, go over to Spine. And enter the remote database host. Save. Then we get that command again. Okay, and as we did with the other one, we have to allow the main polar to be able to talk to this remote polar. And we'll actually have to do the same again on the main polar to allow this user, because this is coming from a different address. So we'll go to Cacti main polar, MySQL root. Oop, I will fix that later. Okay. Okay, that will select the polar 2 address. Go over to the main polar. There we go. So again, remember the importance of these remote polars being able to talk to each other. This is how they sync on the data. At least the main polar needs to be able to maintain a bidirectional communication over SQL with the remote polars. They have to, so the main polar needs to talk to the remote polar needs to talk to the main polar. Okay, now that that's done, we can go to this installation wizard. And in case you forgot, we should expect that this polar setup should automatically detect that it's going to be set up as a remote polar. Okay, and so it did. And what's the one thing that we have to do? Yep, we have to make sure that the config.php file is writable. So again, var www html cacti include. So you can do 777 like I did in the last demo, or change the config.php permission so that Apache owns it, and refresh. Test connection, good. So we'll do next, confirm. And now the second polar is ready to go. Now going back to the main polar, data collection, data collectors, you'll see that the new polar here, the third one, is in new polar status. So get the IP. And as we did before, put the host name of the remote polar, test the connection, connection is successful, save. Now you see that it's in heartbeat mode. Select the polars. Actually, you can even select just the one polar and do a full sync. Actually, I apologize. I believe you do actually have to select all of the polars to do the full sync. Yep, that's right. It's either one of two things. Now this is the part where I'm a little fuzzy on. If you can select just the one polar to do the full sync, or if you have to select all three. I could have just did the sync and didn't wait long enough with my impatience. So you can just kind of experiment there. I'll experiment it if I notice that I can select just the one and do the full sync. I'll let you know by updating the video. And with that, we have set up a distributed cacti environment using remote polars and setting up the MySQL backend for it to work. I hope this video was very helpful. The reason why I created it is that I remember having to set this up the first time myself, and there wasn't many resources, so I hope that this helps you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below, and feel free to reach out to me at Sean@SeanMancini.com or on my website www.seanmancini.com. Talk to you guys later. Thank you. Bye.